Hello, everyone. Welcome to my February update. My name is Jeff Halper, and I'm the director of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. And this is our monthly update in terms of what's happening in Palestine and Israel, and in particular, what we have to do as supporters of Palestinian rights in the international community in order to try to finally achieve a political resolution to all of this. In ICAD, while we engage in resistance on the ground, we rebuild demolished homes, we work in solidarity with our Palestinian partners on the ground all the time. And we go abroad and we speak and we work with other organizations abroad that are working for Palestinian rights. We all understand that in the end, protest, even resistance, education, lobbying, BDS, while these are all crucial elements, do not replace a political resolution of this. This is a political issue. Even the ICJ's ruling, and as much as we're excited about the fact that finally the world's court has recognized plausible genocide on the part of Israel, and international law is now helping us to promote our political activities, that's not going to resolve the issue either. It has to be a political resolution, and that's always been ICAD's focus. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Because as we're focused, as we should be, obviously, on Gaza and Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza, the destruction of Gaza and its people, in many ways, a much bigger political situation is developing that we're less focused on, but I think is really crucial. Gaza is a human tragedy. In political terms, it's not as important as the West Bank and as the wider issue, the geopolitical issue of Israel's place in the wider Middle East, what we've been talking about as normalization between Israel and the Arab governments. And don't forget, Netanyahu, just before October 7th, got up at the UN with a map of a greater Israel that included all the occupied territories, and said, we are on the cusp of signing an agreement with Saudi Arabia to normalize, and this is the new Middle East. And that, in fact, in my view, and I think and I found substantiating information on this, that was part of the calculation behind the Hamas attack of October 7th. In other words, had this actually gone through, maybe that very week, this normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, that would have erased the Palestinian people as political actors. That was part of the point of it. It was, let's get on to the bigger issues in the Middle East. And this pesky Palestinian issue we don't have to deal with. They'll be at the end. Netanyahu said this in the United Nations. First, we'll deal with the bigger Middle Eastern issues. We'll normalize. And then at the end, the Palestinians will basically accept anything that we give them, any crumbs we give them. And criticize terrorism as you will, that attack stopped this normalization process in its tracks. But it's super important for the United States and NATO and Israel. And this is the political agenda that Biden is moving forward. And this is what I want to talk about today. Because this is the biggest danger to the Palestinians, I think, that's emerged for many, many, many years, and that is that in bigger geopolitical terms, NATO, the United States, its European partners that have always been hegemonious in the Middle East. And here they have their pro-Western governments, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Jordan, and so on, are now being challenged in a very fundamental way by China and Russia, which of course is very strong in Syria today and other parts of the Middle East, with their surrogate here in the Middle East, which is Iran. So we have a real conflict here, contest between two blocks, a Western-oriented NATO bloc with Israel and a Chinese, or I would say not Chinese-oriented, but certainly a global South, maybe anti-Western in a way, or at least counter-Western alliance of China, Russia, Iran, and other forces in Iraq and Syria and other Middle Eastern countries. And this is the fight for hegemony. This is the big issue, not the Palestinian issue itself. And, just a week or so before October 7th, Biden announced at the G7 meeting, IMAC, the India-Middle East Canal, this huge project, or not a canal, a corridor, going from India through the Middle East, through Israel, and into Europe, as a counterweight to the Chinese Belt and Road system. So we're seeing almost a direct confrontation of these two major global forces in the Middle East. And Israel is pivotal in all of this, mainly for both its geopolitical location, but also for its military might. And if there's going to be a NATO of the Middle East that NATO is talking about, it will be led by Egypt, Saudi Arabia, but militarily by Israel. And so so what's interrupted this process that was going on very smoothly was the October 7th attack. And that derailed this whole process of normalization, because as much as the Arab governments, the pro-Western governments, want this to go through, the Arab peoples all over the world obviously are not only repressed and against their own governments, but are very much in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And so it became very hard, and it still is very hard in this context of the Israeli assault on Gaza, for normalization to go ahead. So what's crucial for Biden and for NATO is to go back to the track of normalization, to re-marginalize the Palestinians. And the way that's done, and Biden has been talking about this since October 7th in a very, very overt way, is we have to resolve this pesky Israel-Palestinian conflict, as they call it. We have to resolve this in order to get on to the bigger issues, the bigger geopolitical issues that we've been talking about. How do you do that? The two-state solution. This has always been the mantra since 1967 of governments, because it's a great conflict management tool. For all these years, including Oslo, you've been able to simply manage this conflict, let Israel grow, let Israel develop its settlements, let Israel basically expand into the Palestinian territory. But by keeping this promise of negotiations and a future Palestinian state, and yes, we're all committed to Palestinian rights, the international community has been able to avoid expending the political capital to actually resolve this conflict in a way that gives Palestinians their national rights, that is in direct opposition to Israel. And since Israel is their main ally, they're not going to give Palestinians their rights. They're going to do whatever Israel is going to define what the two-state solution means, because they need Israel much more than they need the Palestinians in this transactional world of international politics that we live in. So what's coming down the pipeline? Tom Friedman wrote about this a couple of days ago in the New York Times, what he calls the Biden doctrine, is the imposition. We're not talking about another Oslo process. We're not talking about negotiations that go on forever. We're talking about the United States imposing on the Palestinians an apartheid two-state solution. Now, we in ICAD have never been against the two-state solution. In fact, as we know, the two-state solution was accepted by the PLO already in 1988. It was kind of the basis of the Oslo negotiations, so that you could make a case that an actual genuine two-state solution could work. In other words, a Palestinian state, small as it is, it's not just because the Palestinians, of course, are the indigenous population. There's 14 million Palestinians, but they would be confined to the occupied territory, which is only 22% of Palestine. Nonetheless, they would have borders with Arab countries and Israel. They would have a seaport in the Mediterranean through Gaza. Refugees would be able to return, so that you could make a case that the two-state solution could work. Now, we don't believe this is ever going to happen. Israel would never allow it. But nevertheless, if we being those that are fighting for Palestinian rights and a just resolution to this, if we want to engage, we can't say, well, we don't believe in the two-state solution. We believe in one state or something. No, we have to engage on their terms. They set the agenda, unfortunately, they being the international community, Biden, Israel, and so on. And if they're pushing the two-state solution, I think it's strategic for us to say, okay, you know what? We accept that, a two-state solution. But we insist that it be a just, genuine two-state solution. Now, what does a genuine Palestinian state mean? Even this mini state, in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. In other words, what would be a genuine state that would not be an apartheid-style Bantustan? These would have to be the conditions that those that support Palestinian rights, would have to insist are the fundamental elements of any two-state solution. In other words, we have to keep this process honest. And these are the conditions that we have to insist on. You want two states? Okay. The Palestinian state has to have internationally recognized borders, and it has to be in control of those borders. Because one of Israel's fundamental military doctrines is, even in a two-state solution, a Palestinian state will be demilitarized. It'll be controlled by Israel militarily and in security terms. Israel will control the internal movement within that Palestinian state, and Israel will control the borders. Well, that's obviously not a genuine state. That becomes an apartheid Bantustan. And so we have to fight that. That's one condition. Palestinian state has internationally recognized borders that it controls. Second of all, the state has to be territorially contiguous. In other words, there has to be it has to have all the West Bank and East Jerusalem and Gaza, and then a connecting link between Gaza and the West Bank in order for it to be economically viable. And this goes against the Israeli facts on the ground that Israel has systematically imposed on Palestine over the last 40 some years. And that's the settlements. The settlements are placed in a way, and now they're being consolidated into huge settlement blocks and a whole massive system of highways. And they're consolidated in a way that truncates Palestinian territory. In other words, instead of one contiguous area, Palestinians will get enclaves. An enclave in the north of the West Bank around Jenin and Nablus, a canton in the center around Ramallah, a canton in the south around Bethlehem, Hebron, all divided by and controlled by the Israeli settlement blocks that go all the way to the Jordan Valley. That is not in any way a sovereign, economically viable, contiguous Palestinian state. So the settlements have to go in order for there to be a viable state for Palestine. Third, the Palestinian state that emerges has to have sovereign control over all its resources, its water, its land, its mineral, its sacred sites, its tourist attractions, like Jerusalem. It has to have East Jerusalem and the Old City especially, not only for the religious and cultural significance, but because Jerusalem is the economic center of the Palestinian economy. Tourism is the Palestinians' largest industry, and there is no tourist site in the world probably more important than Jerusalem. And if you add in Bethlehem, that begins to give some economic viability to the Palestinian state. You rob it of its economic viability if Israel insists on keeping East Jerusalem that it has annexed. So all control by Palestine of its resources, including its tourist resources, including East Jerusalem, have to be in place. In that, and finally, well, not finally, second to finally, as opposed to Israel's demand that the Palestinian state be demilitarized, I mean, it can be to some degree not demilitarized, but it can have some limitations on its military force. That happens to other states as well. Nevertheless, it has to have the ability to defend its sovereignty and its territory. At least there has to be a meaningful armed force of Palestinian armed force with policing capabilities within its own state. And that again is opposed by Israel because Israel insists on being the Palestinian armed force. Just like it uses the Palestinian security services today and the Palestinian Authority to control Palestine, that's its model for the future. The Israeli army will stay in many cases in certain parts of this new Palestinian state. That cannot be. Okay? And finally, of course, the state has to have the ability to reintegrate the refugees. So what ICAD is trying to develop now, and we want to reach out to our partners all over the world, and this is, I think, is crucial. And this is why I'm calling on all of you to help us and support us in this. This is the political call of the moment. And that is a call to mobilize around a campaign against two-state apartheid. Because in fact, if Biden succeeds in establishing two states the way we think he will, in which Israel keeps its settlements, I cannot see the United States and the international community forcing Israel to give up. There's 750,000 settlers in the West Bank. Are they all going to go back into Israel? It's hard to believe that that's the case, but if it isn't the case, there is no viable Palestinian state, right? It's still truncated, and so what we have to really protect against, defend against, fight against, is the imposition of two states. That's in fact a two-state apartheid system in which you have an expanded Israel on maybe 85% of historic Palestine with its settlements intact, and Palestinians confined to a Bantustan, like in South Africa, an apartheid Bantustan on 4 or 5 enclaves that are not sovereign, that are not economically viable, and that do not give the Palestinians any of the rights that they need. In other words, the two-state solution can be a good thing if it really means a genuine Palestinian state, but then it has to conform to the principles that I just laid out, and that has to be our demand. We have to be the watchdogs to keep this honest, that the two-state solution gives the Palestinians a genuine, if small, state, or the two-state solution can be an apartheid system, which I think is what Israel and Biden have in mind, obviously. And from that point of view, we have to find it. And once, I believe, finally, we show that the two-state solution is not in the cards, that it cannot be anything more than a vehicle for imposing apartheid on the Palestinians, then we can go on to thinking about more just and doable solutions like the one that ICAD supports, which is one democratic state for everyone. Right now, we're getting pushback. No, the two-state solution is still alive. Governments are saying that. Even most Palestinian support groups still support the two-state solution. Certainly those in Israel, the Palestinian Authority still supports a two-state solution. So until we get past that, we're stuck. We can't advocate for something more just like one state. And so we have to engage in that two-state process. And again, in this campaign against two-state apartheid, we, with the Palestinians, have to define the parameters of what a genuine, sovereign, viable Palestinian state would look like. These are the elements, and then assert ourselves with this campaign and assure that our governments do not agree to any two-state solution that does not include these elements. So that's my word of the month. We're really working on this, and it's crucial because Biden, he's going to make a declaration maybe this week about this, but this is coming down in the next couple months. And we have to mobilize, and we, the supporters of Palestinian rights with our Palestinian partners, have to be the ones that really say no to apartheid. You want two states, either a real two states or something else, okay? So let's see how we organize around that, and if in fact we can mobilize, even though obviously we're distracted, and we have to keep that. It's not a distraction really. We have to keep the focus on Gaza, but we can't lose the focus on the bigger geopolitical reality. So thanks for listening, and that's my report or my call for February. Bye.